Are You For Real? Managing a Virtual Team. And we're very excited to be here with you today. I would like to invite you guys in the back to move forward. Obviously, they've sort of over-planned for the masses. And in fact, you could say that we have a virtual audience right now. It's virtually filled. But I do invite you to come forward if you would like. So welcome everybody. I'd like to thank Coscast for streaming this out live to the remote participants. And just to let you know that this session is being streamed live, so don't say anything that might incriminate you. And we'll do our best to not incriminate ourselves. I'd like to introduce the panel. My name is Ian Rett. I'm the managing partner at Civic Actions. Civic Actions is a network of geeks for good. We are 30 people in 7 time zones. We all work remotely and virtually from anywhere in the world. And we do strategy and implementation, web development for nonprofits and socially minded businesses. Next to me is Jen Sramick. She's a partner at Civic Actions. She's responsible for service delivery. And then Tom Heck is the president of the International Association of Teamwork Facilitators. We're very pleased to have him interrupt his family vacation to join us today. Drove up from Florida yesterday or today?
Actually today.
All right, well, thanks for being here. It's really great to have you. We were going to have a gentleman named Piotr Poznansky from Amnesty International. It's one of our clients. He's an information architect. He is in Poland, and unfortunately, I don't know if you heard the news, but the president of Poland died in a plane crash today. So we were very regretfully, we're very sorry to not have Piotr with us today. He was not involved in that in any way, but it just didn't work out to have him join us remotely as we had hoped to do. So let me tell you about what we're going to tell you about. First, we're going to talk about the emergence of teleworking. Jen is going to offer an Ignite-style presentation of managing a virtual team. So if you want to bail out in the first 10 minutes, you'll get a lot of good information. We'll do a quick conversation amongst ourselves of fears and opportunities around working remotely and managing virtual teams. We're going to talk about strategies for establishing clear communication plans, strategies for evaluating vendors that are virtual or that work in this way. And we'll talk about skills and resources for working virtually. And we'll offer an incomplete list of tools, and we'll do some Q&A. First, let's talk about the emerging trend of telework. This has been something that's been studied for a couple of decades now as people work from home, and as technology has developed and advanced, the opportunity to work remotely has grown significantly. The value or the bandwidth of information that can be easily transmitted over the pipes of the interwebs is such that it actually makes it very possible now to work remotely in such a way that you couldn't really tell if you are working in a large organization and you have offices in different places. There's a very little difference between speaking to a colleague on the other coast and speaking to a colleague who's in their kitchen or living room. So this is sort of a trend that's emerging, and what we see is that as gasoline prices increase, as the cost of energy increases, and as there's more of a desire for workers to work remotely, it's an incredibly advantageous way of doing work. Let me just take a quick poll. How many of you work remotely? How many?
Oh my God.
That's awesome. How many of you work remotely most of the time? How many of you work with a team that works remotely? Awesome. Telework saves up to $8,300 per person for a business in terms of real estate absenteeism and turnover. So there's a real financial incentive for businesses to support teleworking of their employees. If people were to telework, I think the statistic is if 20% or 1 out of 5 workers worked remotely, it would save 276 million barrels of oil a year. Employees would save between $3,400 and $10,500 in transportation costs. So all those tolls and parking and gas and wear and tear, all those get to be saved by employees. And interestingly, telework also saves lives. An estimate of 78,000 traffic-related injuries and deaths and $8 billion of accident-related costs. There's a lot of just by the numbers reasons to telework, and from just speaking as a manager, how people work remotely is it really gives a great deal of flexibility, and it allows people to have a much more balanced work-life equation. How do you say balance and balance? I'm not repeating yourself. So this is something that's just going to continue to grow as technology again increases, as more and more people work remotely and experience working with others remotely. People are just going to continue to do that more and more. So up next is Jen. She's going to Ignite.
I'm going to stand up.
So is everyone familiar with the Ignite format and how that works? Anyone not familiar? Great. So Ignite is a style of presentation. It was started by the O'Reilly Publishing Company a couple years ago. It's really catching on. The format is it's 5 minutes. It's time constrained to 5 minutes. It uses PowerPoint as a presentation medium, and the slides are timed to auto increment every 15 seconds. So you get 20 slides every 15 seconds for 5 minutes, and that's your box to play inside of for an Ignite presentation. And people do them on all kinds of different topics. It's a really effective way to deliver information in a really quick way. And Jen is going to demonstrate that for you now. So we're going to start the clock. Are you ready, Jen?
Yeah,
All
I'm
right.
ready. Okay, this presentation is about virtual projects and virtual project management and elements of success. The elements of success of virtual projects are actually very similar usually to those of online or offline projects. So those are repeatable, and then I have another section on the skills of project managers. So the 8 elements of success in virtual projects. My husband said I should have used the noble gases since there are 8 of them, but I used the Hero periodic table. I'm going a little fast for myself. The first, in any project, online or offline, is to approach it as a partnership, not necessarily a hierarchical relationship with the team. Usually projects are partnership-based and require everybody to learn from one another and use a lot of different skills. The second is creating a timeline that is workable for everyone on the team and sticking to it. So if you're coming together as a group of partners and have a timeline for a project that's 6 months, and that works for 8/9 of you, and the last person it doesn't work for at all, it's not going to work. Third is bring your expertise to the table and allow others to bring theirs. So for me, working in web technology, very often, almost always with nonprofits, sometimes political, progressive organizations, we have to let our nonprofit partners bring their expertise to the table about their business, and we bring ours. Next is adapting communication tools to the lowest common technology. So if you have 2 or 3 or 1 partner that's only able to use the phone and they can't webcast or Twitter or even be online, you have to use the phone because you can't just exclude a partner. So figure out what's going to be workable for people. Next is assume there'll be a learning curve on both sides and plan it in. Your first work period is going to be a lot less efficient than your last one. Just plan that in so it's not an upset. Create opportunities to work together in person. I can't overemphasize this enough. No project works when everybody's always virtual. You have to come together. We try to do it with our teams every 3 months at a minimum, and it makes things work a lot more smoothly. Pause for reflection and analysis of how things are going. So don't just blaze through the whole thing. Stop at key points and make sure that what you're doing is still connected to the original vision and strategy and goals of the project. Next. It's really important. It's going to stay up there for another second. Next set of slides is important qualities and skills to look for or develop in a virtual project manager. This is just to say that virtual project management is a relatively new field, and not everybody who's a project manager has ever managed anything virtually, but they already have a core set of skills, and so you can build on those. Impeccable communication skills is key. You'll notice the tape across the phone there. That's to emphasize listening. The project manager should not just be a lecturer and talk and talk and talk all the time. They really have to stop and listen a lot. Also, speaking loudly enough, that kind of thing is all important. The ability to foster a sense of shared ownership of the project. So a project manager, really, their job is to get everybody on the same team and to work together in their various roles, goalie or forward, to get the project done. And they have to understand themselves as a role on the team and not the boss. This is, I think, one of the most mistaken roles of a project manager, is that they're sort of just the boss of everything. It's just a role. It's just like an engineer or a communications manager. It's a role, and it's a pivotal role, and every other role is also important. The ability to read between the lines, that goes along with really listening. Just really listening to what people are saying and how they're saying it, and their tone of voice goes a long way, especially when you're virtual, to diagnosing issues and making sure that things are on the right track. Sometimes people's upset shows in their voice, even when they're like, yeah, no, it's no problem. It's no problem. Create opportunities to celebrate success. It can be easy when you're sharing the same office to celebrate success all the time, because you're seeing each other and you're like, yeah, high five, we just launched that site or just did that cool outreach campaign. But when you're virtual, you kind of forget. You celebrate maybe the day of and you forget to congratulate one another. Next is the ability to put relationships first. Virtual project management is very much involves technology, but it's about the relationships. It's not about the technology. Technology just enables the relationships to happen more purely. Work toward excellence, not just good enough. There should always be an ethic of checking in and making sure that things are being done as well as they possibly can at all times and circling back. Acting as capable coaches for those on their team. So for those of you who've ever played a team sport, your coach probably isn't a quarterback and a lineman and a running back and whatever other position on the field. They know the game and they know what excellence looks like from every chair, and they can coach people toward that. And last is just that they love what they do. It's a challenging job to be a virtual project manager because you're dealing with managing a project and all the other challenges of it being virtual. And if you don't love what you do, it's just going to be really tough. I'm Jen. You can follow me on Twitter at IdeaSeed, and Civic Actions on Twitter as Civic Actions. Thanks.
All right. I want to just really quickly say if anybody would like to contribute to the notes, up here on this screen is a Google Doc that's available for anyone to go and start editing. The address is right there at the top. If you go to civicactions.com/r_u_for_real_panel, and I cannot underscore that enough. If you go to that website address, there's a link to this Google Doc, and feel free to offer notes and stuff. You'll be able to see the notes being updated live. This is one of the many tools that are used for doing remote work. Has anybody worked on a Google Doc collaboratively before? It's a pretty remarkable thing to happen. It's a relatively new technology. It's a couple years perhaps, but to watch people adding to a document live from different places is a pretty cool thing. So I invite you to go to that URL and to take notes if you wish. Tom is going to now lead us in an exercise called Ceiling Clock.
Okay. In a moment, we're going to talk about fears and opportunities when it comes to working with virtual teams or building virtual teams or leading virtual teams. But before we do that, I want you to look up at the ceiling just for a moment, and I want you to imagine an analog clock face, a second hand moving around that clock face. So imagine that. Now take your right hand, like I'm doing, and with your index finger, point at the ceiling and follow that second hand around in a clockwise fashion. Keep it going. Now lowering your hand, but keeping your fingertip pointed towards the ceiling. Lower your hand, keep your finger moving in the clockwise direction, and bring your finger to your chest here, and look at your fingertip. What direction is it moving? Counterclockwise. Now some of you are wanting to do this again. Go ahead. So in virtual teams, what we have is this event called virtual teams. Now, some people will look at that situation and they'll get scared, and they'll say, "No, we don't want to do that," or certain people within the organization will say, "This is a good idea." Others will say, "No, we don't have the capacity to do that." So, what I'd like you to do now is just turn to someone who's close to you, and you can get in groups of 2 or 3, but just turn around, and what I'd like you to do is quickly, with a piece of paper or just in a conversation, I want you to answer these 2 questions. What are the fears of working on virtual teams? Either you're leading them or developing them, and also, on the flip side of that coin, what are the opportunities that are also there? So what are the fears? What are the opportunities? Whenever groups get together and start to wrestle with this, these are always the conversations that they're having. Fears and opportunities. Going to let you talk for just a minute or 2. Get a quick list, either in your head or on your laptop, piece of paper. Okay. Let's get ready to, you want to? Well, let's bring it back. So let's do this. We've got this document that's live up on the screen, and let's get a few shares into the fears. Why are people fearful of virtual teams? Raise your hand. You're going to have to speak up. Yes, in the back. Oh, yes. Okay, our staff actually working, yes. And they may not get to know each other. Yeah. Okay, yes, in the back. Okay. Technical assistance or support. How fast is support going to be there as opposed to just walking over to the person in the next room? Good. And there was someone in the back. Okay. Yes. In the white shirt. Okay. So sometimes there's a co-located team. Is this what you're saying? There's a co-located, and then there's also a virtual component. Right. Yeah. Okay, so the physical visual, the power of that, and then also what I'm hearing you say is that, is that person who's working remotely, are they being heard the same as if I'm sitting here with Ian, and Jen's in San Francisco, and, and Ian and I are able to have this conversation, but maybe we're not holding Jen's or valuing her opinion as much because she's so far away. Okay. Yeah, it's sort of that water cooler effect of what happens. There's the formal meeting, and then there's the informal stuff that happens on the walk from the parking lot into the building, this type of thing. Yes? Yes, yeah, the communication piece. So, in fact, we're going to be leading into a communication piece. One of the things that Civic Actions does really well is they've refined this communication piece and between team members, and we're going to share some of lessons learned, best practices. So let's look on the flip side. So with all of those fears, and some of them are real, why are there really opportunities that are big enough for us to say, yes, let's keep going? Yes. Yes, flexibility. Where are the best people for your organization or your team? Do they live close by where the physical building is, or do they live in some other country, or where? It doesn't matter where they live. If they're virtual, you can find the best people And there's also a lifestyle piece that you touched on there. Yeah, that can be really important for people. It is for me. Another really important opportunity, what's a big one that is that you would argue to someone or present to someone and say, this is a really important opportunity that we could be missing out on? Yes. Round the clock support. Round the world. Yes. Yeah, and where do people live in Civic Actions? How many?
We're in 7 time zones, so we definitely see that sort of thing happening as well. It's really great when you're working on something and you can pass it off to someone who's in Europe. They work on it, you wake up in the morning, you get the work back. So the work continues to roll around the clock, as opposed to everyone's in their office and at 5 o'clock they leave, and then 18 hours go by and the next day starts with, it's pretty cool to see that happen.
Yeah, yeah. Another opportunity? Right. So what works best for you, even controlling the technology, the speed of your connection, whatever that can be. Right, right. So being able to make it work just specifically for you and work wherever. You could be, I'm going to be going to upstate New York this summer, and I'm going to be bringing the technology that I need with me, and I could be anywhere and still be able to get the work done. So really, this is great. So one of the things that comes up in the fears and the opportunities, almost invariably, there's communication issues. So we're going to move into best practices that are used at Civic Actions that might help the conversation in this arena.
Before we do that, I just want to add one other opportunity, which is working outside. There is nothing like sitting on your back deck with birds and animals and wind, and as opposed to being under 60 hertz, fluorescent lighting. It's really, really awesome. I encourage you to do that as much as possible. So we're going to talk now about establishing clear communications plans with teams and some strategies around doing that. We have several that we're going to talk about. One is called Conversations for Action, breakdowns, withholds, building trust, open, honest feedback, and some best practices around conference calls. So often when we're working remotely, we come together as a team, and we've identified some best practices for conference calls that work pretty well. First, we're going to talk about Conversations for Action. Conversation for Action is a process that allows 2 people or numbers of people to be clear about what's expected and how things are going to get done. The conversation for action looks like this. There is a client or a customer and a performer. These are the 2 roles in a conversation for action. One person is the person for whom the work is being delivered, and the other person is the person who's delivering the work. So those are the 2 roles. A conversation for action can start in one of 2 ways: a request or an offer. A request is when a client says to a performer, I would like to know if you could do X, Y, or Z by this time. So that's a request. An offer is someone saying, I can do that, I could deliver that dozen roses on Thursday or whatever. So it's either the performer offering or a client requesting. And so it starts with a promise with completion date. Both the request for and offer have what are called conditions of satisfaction. And this is probably the most important element of a conversation for action, is the conditions of satisfaction. What that means is when you start a conversation for action, you're being very clear about exactly what is being agreed to. This is a real easy place for things to break down, both virtually and in real life, when those conditions of satisfaction are not clearly delineated. So let's do an example of a conversation, starting a conversation for action. So Jen is a project manager. and let's say that I'm a developer. And so she's going to act as a client and make a request.
Okay, I was actually going to use lunch as the option.
Okay.
Okay, so Ian, could you get me some lunch?
Sure.
I'd like a vegetarian lunch. It has to have whole wheat involved, and I need it in 20 minutes.
Okay. Okay, I can do that.
Okay.
So that was a quick conversation for action. The client is making a request of the performer. I'm going to go out and get her lunch. The conditions of satisfaction are vegetarian lunch, has to have whole wheat, and must be delivered in 20 minutes. I've agreed to do that. So now I've made a promise, and that's the next step in here is a promise. You can also decline. Let's say that I'm have another person for whom I'm getting another job that I have to do. I'm on deadline. I've got to get something done. So I can't meet the condition of satisfaction of delivering it in 20 minutes. So I could say, no, I'm sorry, I'm busy. I can't do that. That's a decline. So when a conversation for action starts, you can accept it, you can decline it, you can renegotiate, which is to say, well, I can't do it in 20 minutes because I've got this deadline, but if you could wait for 45 minutes, I could go after I'm done with this thing. And so we would be negotiating the terms of the conditions of satisfaction to get to a clear set of conditions of satisfaction that we're both agreeing to and understanding. So accept, decline, renegotiate. There's another way to handle conversation for action or request or an offer, and that's called a commit to commit. A commit to commit is to say, I don't have enough information right now to answer whether or not I can do it, so I can't accept it or decline it, and I'm not ready to renegotiate it, but if you'll give me till the end of the day, I will tell you whether or not I can do that thing. So commit to commit. So there's the 4 responses to starting a conversation for action: accept, decline, commit to commit, or renegotiate. So once we've established a set of conditions of satisfaction, then I, as the performer, am going to go and I'm going to perform the action or deliver the work. So I'm going to go and start doing it. If it weren't lunch and it were developing a web page for donations or something like that, Jen would say, I need a web page that has these conditions. It needs to be orange. It needs to have a text field. You need to have $5 and $10 and $25 buttons on there for people to donate. So I'd go and start doing the work. One of the things that's really important in a conversation for action is, first of all, when you have a promise that's been delivered, is to document the conditions of satisfaction. Really, really, really important. When you have an agreement with somebody, to document it and say, okay, this is what we've agreed to. And this is especially true. It's not so important for going out and getting lunch, but for a big project where someone's going to go away and work for weeks, perhaps, and maybe months. You want to be able to, when at the conclusion of that work, be able to reference back to the conditions of satisfaction and say, these are the things that we all agreed to. If you document it at the outset of a performance of a project, the likelihood of there being breakdowns and misunderstanding at the end of a project is minimized because you've been very clear up front in documenting it. Another important aspect of performance is reporting. So if let's say Jen's asked me to do a project that takes several weeks, it's one thing for me to go away and do it and then come back a couple of weeks later and deliver it. But in the meantime, Jen's like, how are things going? She doesn't really know. So building into the conversation for action a reporting cycle. So Jen, in a conversation for action, one of the conditions of satisfaction might be a daily report or a report at the end of the week of how you're doing. So it builds into the process a communication cycle that happens to deliver feedback to the client in such a way that they know what's happening and what's going on. And then at some point the work is done, and we call it complete. So I've gone out and I've gotten lunch for Jen, and I've come back and it's 19 minutes, and I deliver the vegetarian lunch with whole wheat, and we review the conditions of satisfaction, and now the client can say, I accept or decline the completion. It's either, I either met the conditions of satisfaction or I didn't. So then the client or customer says, okay, I accept, I declare that this is, I'm satisfied. The conditions of satisfaction are met. And that's why, again, why documenting conditions of satisfaction are really important. Now, inside of all this, what happens all the time? Breakdowns occur.
Like that.
Yeah, like that. A breakdown is obviously when something doesn't go according to plan. Expectations are not met. When we use the term breakdown, you might have a negative connotation, like someone's having a nervous breakdown or something like that. In civic actions, we don't have that negative charge around a breakdown. A breakdown is simply an acknowledgement that something is not working according to expectations. It's simply an acknowledgement. By labeling it and calling it that there's a breakdown, it creates an opportunity to create something new. And this is really important because when I have a breakdown or someone has a breakdown in a project, it allows them to get back on track very quickly. What can happen very easily when someone has a breakdown is they get stuck in that point of breakdown, and things can get really hairy at that point. So anybody can, in a conversation for action, anybody can declare a breakdown. The client can declare a breakdown and say, I'm declaring a breakdown. This was not whole wheat. This is rye bread, and I asked for whole wheat. I mean, she would say that in the conversation about completion. But it might be that, like, okay, I'm declaring a breakdown. It's been 25 minutes. Where are you? I'm at the store. My car broke down, or whatever. So anybody can declare a breakdown. The client, the performer, can also declare a breakdown and say, you know what, I'm not going to be able to meet your deadline in time. And so what occurs at the point of a breakdown is a renegotiation of the conditions of satisfaction. So I have a breakdown. I'm not going to be able to deliver this in time. I'd like to renegotiate a time that we can do it. So resetting the conditions of satisfaction that we're operating under and working from. So does anyone have questions about the conversations for action, what we just talked about, this conversation structure? Awesome.
I got it. Could you share how you go about, obviously you have this on the team within Civic Actions. How much education do you go through with your clients? And I mean, on the front end, do you actually teach them this conversation structure?
Not directly. In some cases we do, but the point of the structure is really that it can be transparent. The most important thing is that you have the conditions of satisfaction. You understand them. You can translate in any language any phrase that you want. The point is that you're very explicit between the client and the performer about what those conditions of satisfaction are. We do talk about breakdowns and some of these other things with clients, and let them know how they can declare a breakdown, that it doesn't mean that anyone's wrong or terrible or bad or anything like that.
Or fired. You ready for that?
Yeah.
Okay. So how many of you all have had do you have a question?
Is that also considered a breakdown?
Yeah, either side is a breakdown. And really a breakdown is just the plan we laid out is not the same any longer. Can't be the same. Yeah, and you can, what Ian said is you can renegotiate the conditions of satisfaction. And what that might mean, we work for a lot of clients who, if we slip on a deadline, it doesn't work for them. And we can't just renegotiate the launch date. So we need to potentially renegotiate who's doing the work, or how many people are working on it, or what is done, so that it can still meet the deadline and come up with something that's mutually agreeable and possible, if that makes sense. Okay? Any other questions on the conversations for action? Just a note that it's really a process that is run by the project managers at Civic Actions. So the client doesn't have to learn anything. They're already having to learn a lot to work on the web and work with us virtually and stuff, so we don't want to pile too much on them. But we teach them how to operate within it, and we declare breakdowns and call them breakdowns and all that stuff. So we coach them through the process, and some of them pick it up, and actually a few that I've recently checked in with love it so much that they adopt parts of it or all of it for themselves. So it works really well. How many of you all have had, since there's a lot of virtual workers in here, an experience where you're communicating via email or something, or phone, and somebody's short-tempered or something just happened, and you kind of leave this ugh, like that feeling? How many people have had that happen? And on a scale of 1 to 10, how easy does it feel to like get back on track with the person? Like 2, not easy? Okay, so one of the really challenging parts of our work is that we're working with people who we really rarely see, relatively speaking to people you work in an office with. And so if something happens, and we're also working under deadlines and a lot of stressful conditions in a lot of cases, and late nights in some cases, and so tension can run high sometimes, and sometimes people communicate in email in a way that's just curt or short or abrupt, rude in some cases, and communicate via phone that way too. And it can just, when the hang up happens, leave the other person feeling really icky and like there's a bug on the windshield. And we have a process called withholds to just remove the bugs from the windshield so that there's always a clear view between the whoever it is, the client and the company, or the 2 people on the team, or the client partner and the civic actions partner, whomever. It has a structure, and it really is intended to just let people clear the air. It's obvious when you have a bug on the windshield, as I call it, that usually when you see the person or get an email from them, there's like a tight feeling in your chest, and you're just like, oh God, we don't want to even interact with that person right now, and that kind of thing. So we've all been there, and there's sometimes just a lot of charge that gets created, and a lot of times it wasn't even intended by the person who said the thing or did the thing that caused the charge. So the withhold process is really a conversation structure, so again, kind of a process, that allows 2 people or more than 2 people to get clear of charge and the static that builds up. The first part of the process, the structure, is that it requires agreement. So, maybe you work most of the time at home, and then on Fridays you come into the office. You don't just go up to the person and attack them for emailing you in a rude way. You say, hey, there's something I wanted to talk to you about. Is it okay if we do that? And really get their permission. They might not be in a place to listen to you right then because they say no. If they say no, it doesn't mean that they don't want to listen to you at all. It just might be, hey, I have a board meeting in 20 minutes. Can we just do this after? But find a time and a place where there is agreement that you can have the conversation and share the feedback. That's the first step. The second is that all the other person does is just listen. So you say, hi, Gregory, I'm wondering if you and I can have a conversation later. There's some things I need to share with you. And then he says, sure. So then I say, okay, yesterday when you sent that email to me that was really rude, I was under a lot of stress because I'm managing this project on a tight deadline, and it just left me feeling like you weren't being a partner with me on the team, and that you didn't care about how I felt in my role of having to tell the client, what you said in a way that I had to translate from your rude email. And it just left me feeling really like I couldn't count on you to be part of the team. And then he just hears that and says, okay, here's what I heard you say. When I sent that email, you got that I didn't respect you as part of the team, and it made your life worse, and it made you feel bad, and is that right? And so they're not saying, that's what you said, they're saying, what I heard is this, am I right in what I heard? And then if the person says yes, then they have an opportunity to say, do you want to say anything else? And if they say no, they don't want to say anything else, then you can say, is there anything that you want to share with me about it? And so Gregory may have something he wants to share with me and might say, well, the reason I sent that email is because you left me a really mean message on my phone, and I just got really upset and I just let it, sent it before I thought. And so he has a chance to, bring his own feelings into the conversation. Really the goal is that we each listen to each other, and I say, okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that when you sent the email, you had just gotten the message that I left you that you thought was rude. And so you can just, work through it that way, back and forth, and just make sure you're all hearing each other. And then it just gives the person a chance to basically say what they intended. When I sent the email, I didn't mean to make you feel like you weren't a partner or that I didn't respect you. It just was in the heat of the moment, and I'm sorry. And then you can accept their apology, and then it's all over. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be an apology. Sometimes it's just, here's where I was, here was I was. It's just what happened. Nobody has to be sorry about it. It's just what happened. But it allows you to move on. And almost always, when people have these kinds of conversations on our team, it just automatically quiets the storm. And it's really important for our teams to be able to work together really effectively and efficiently, and they stay in a team together. So if one person is just not getting along and has a hard time resolving challenges, then it doesn't work. So we train everybody in this process. We do practices with them if they're new, so that in front of them, so with other people, so that they can see how it works. And then if they ever have a conversation or a withhold conversation that they need to have, they can request a member of the company to be on the phone with them or in person with them to have it, or just coach them through it. Or they can try it on their own and, perfect it themselves. But it's a really important structure for us, and really to just keep our work, because it's virtual, and it's so important for us to not let those things just build up, because they do, to keep this rolling. And it's one of the things that, as the manager of the project managers, I get a lot of feedback about the effectiveness of it, and people are really grateful to be taught the structure, because it lets them do this in the rest of their life as well. Any questions about that? Withholds?
I just want to add a couple of points on that. That the withhold conversation is not about getting into an argument or trying to resolve anything. It's not about like trying to come to agreement about the facts or whatever. It's just a place for one to listen to the experience of another, and for the other person to have the experience of being listened to and having their feelings heard. One of the biggest sources of that static charge that builds up is not being heard or not feeling like you've been seen. And what this structure allows is it creates a very safe space for one person to share their experience with another, and that's all it is. It's not about trying to fix anything. It's not about laying blame at all. It's simply saying, when this happened, I felt this way. And then the other person just listens and reflects back and says, what I heard you say was, when this happened, you felt this way. And that's it. That conversation will totally transform your relationships when you have this sort of static charge that builds up. It's a very simple structure that is extremely effective at releasing that charge. Because as human beings, we all fail. We all do make mistakes. We all work in a way where we send emails that are poorly worded, or we accidentally hit send and include somebody on a distribution list that maybe you didn't intend them to hear. And having this structure is a way to work around that in a way that doesn't have those sorts of things permanently disable a working relationship. Next is building trust. In a virtual environment especially, we talked about, this was mentioned early on, how do you know that people are working? Trust is extremely important in a virtual environment. It's important everywhere, but especially so in a virtual environment, because you have this human, this human nature where when you don't see somebody, you become detached from their experience. That electric shock experiment where people were pressing a buzzer and you didn't really get the full impact of what was happening to that person, so people would press the button more aggressively. It's just one of those weird things about human nature, and it illustrates the importance of having trust in a relationship. One of the most important ways to build trust is to tell the truth. Duh. Like, who knew? But the fact is that it's really important. We live increasingly in a culture where the truth is sort of bent. We call it truthiness now. Like, there's no such thing as actual truth. But I'll tell you that standing in a place of truth and delivering your truth is actually a very easy way to live, because you don't have to worry about all the complications. You're just being truthful all the time. Another way of building trust is to do what you say you'll do. So when you have a conversation for action and you deliver, you start to build trust. When you don't deliver, that trust starts to disintegrate. So it's really important to do what you say you'll do. It's important to be open in building trust. This withhold structure is a great way to build trust, even when you have breakdowns in that trust. Like when I asked you to do something and you didn't do it, I felt this way. being seen in that way and sharing experience builds trust. Admitting when you're wrong. This is something that's often very difficult for people, but it's actually a really great way to build trust. It's to say, you know what, I made a mistake. It can be real challenging, especially when that mistake has big consequences and you're in the midst of those consequences and someone's really in pain. To still come forward and admit that you're wrong is a way of building trust. Another strategy for building trust is being really clear. And referencing the conversations for action, specifically the conditions of satisfaction. When you're very clear with one another, you build trust.
Yeah, and I think that part of this trust piece is the structure that Civic Actions has in place, is that it's very explicit, and it's very transparent, and so that builds trust among team members and builds trust among yourself and the client. Mm-hmm. So that without these pieces in place and having it being so open, the trust level wouldn't be as high.
Yeah, openness and transparency sort of go hand in hand. We try to be as transparent as possible amongst our team. One of our values is openness. We're open source evangelists, and we really appreciate the idea of collaboration and transparency in the way that we work as well.
By the way, I'm curious, how many people here have read Stephen Covey's Speed of Trust book? No one's read Speed of Trust?
No.
Wow, what a great book. Highly recommend it. The lead trainer for, this is Stephen M.R. Covey. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard of Dr. Covey of the 7 Habits fame. His son, his eldest son, is Stephen M.R. Covey, and he published a book, I think it was 2 years ago, called The Speed of Trust, and he goes about breaking down how you build high trust teams, whether they're virtual or co-located, it doesn't matter. So fantastic book, highly recommend it. You could read the reviews on Amazon.
And website, speedoftrust.com.
Speedoftrust.com.
I put it in the notes.
Yep.
So, Tom, why don't you lead us through some strategies around creating open and honest feedback?
Okay. I've lost. I thought we were doing on strategies for evaluating vendors.
I know we're doing open, honest feedback. We're still in the strategies for communications. We have open, honest feedback, and then we'll talk about conference call best practices.
Okay. Well, strategies for open and honest feedback. I'm going to go back to having a system. How many of you have, when you were, or maybe you still have this if you're working for how many of you work for somebody else? In other words, you're an employee. Okay. And how many of you have the dreaded performance review? Okay. So you have a system. I'm going to guess that many of you, it's at least once a year. Some of you, I'm going to guess it's twice a year. For a virtual team, in the groups that I work with, the biggest challenge for many leaders who are working in the virtual realm is that they get caught up in the technology piece and they forget this equation. I'm going to be talking about this equation in just a minute, but it's what Jessica Lipnack of netage.com calls the 90-10 rule. And in the 90-10 rule, she often talks about the inexperienced virtual team leader will take the 90-10 rule and they'll say technology represents 90% of the team's success. And people, your relationships with those people, are going to represent 10% of your success. And she says that's completely backwards. Actually, the success of your virtual team is 90% of that is going to be your ability to have a relationship with your team and your ability to lead that team in a strong way. So we're going to talk a little bit about leadership, these 7 qualities of the virtual team leader. But right now, I want you to get this piece of the 90-10. It's people 90, technology is 10, and maybe you could even skew it to 80-20. So the most important message that I can share with you and relate to you and the virtual team leaders that I work with is that the biggest stumbling block that they're going to run into is because they're at a distance, they have not created systems to develop a relationship with people at a distance that is based on trust. So they have no real feedback system. The people who struggle, they haven't set criteria like what Civic Actions has done, either with their clients and for success, and they haven't set it with their team members either. And so there's for example, when you bring on someone to who's a new team member on your virtual team, how do you have a system in place to help educate this person as to the culture, literally a checklist? And so I can provide you with, we should upload that document to the Civic Actions, that page. So there's, and some of these checklist pieces are your expectations. So for example, after someone comes in and they're a new team member, we're going to check in with you on a weekly basis. And then after 4 weeks of that, we're going to check in with you on a monthly basis. Like maybe Jen and I, if I'm new to the team, Jen and I are going to set aside a time to not just email, but talk on the phone or video chat. And so there's this, so we each are looking at our calendar, our shared calendar, and I know ahead of time when I'm going to be talking with Jen as face-to-face as we can. So it's having some of these things in place when a new team member comes in. Most of the work that I do is with people and organizations who are new to working with virtual teams. It's either been thrust upon them or the economy has brought this on them, this type of thing. And a classic example, I was talking with someone in the military who comes to work on a Monday, has a message in his inbox and says, come to my office. And as of Monday morning at 9 a.m., he now leads a team of 20 people, a virtual team. He has no experience leading virtual teams whatsoever. None of the people on the team have ever worked on a virtual team. And the expectation is, hey, you all have worked on teams before. How different can it be working on a virtual team? So you can imagine how much, and zero training, zero structure. They just said, let's get rolling. Here's your first task to move forward, which is why I got called as, help. We need some structure.
Great.
Is that useful?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. Jen, you want to talk about some of the best practices that we've identified in doing conference calls?
Sure. You guys all know these. I'm just going to repeat them for purposes of being clear. You all know them because you've probably experienced them all. The first is when you start a conference call, most especially when it's with a new group of people or they're working together for the first time, introduce yourself as the facilitator of the call and then let each person introduce themselves. It's also a really good idea to personalize each person, so not just, hey, I'm Fred, I'm the tech lead, but, oh, hey, Fred, did you know you live in Virginia, and so does Susie, who moved there just recently. So just give people an opportunity to know something about one another so that they have a way to connect that's not just, we're all here for this call, and we're getting off the call. Respect the time box. So you all have been in calls where you're planning to do it for an hour, and it goes for 2, and then your whole schedule's thrown off. Really, create an agenda that has time set aside for each thing that you need to discuss. Allow some time for new things to pop up if that's needed, or have a plan to call another meeting if there are things that pop up that can't be handled in the time box. But don't just assume that everybody's going to be able to go over by a half hour without really creating problems for themselves. Mute when you're not talking. So nobody wants to hear you breathing into your microphone or petting your cat or the dog barking next door or the fire engine going by. It's just really a lot easier to get the thing done that you're trying to get done when other people who aren't talking are muted. Going along with that is to when you have a question or something, just say, this is Gregory, this is Jen, this is Ian, I have a question, or this is Tom, I wanted to add something, so that if people don't know your voice yet, they'll get to know it. And eventually, if you're working with the same team, you can stop doing that because they'll know your voice. The last one is just to check the temperature throughout the call. How's everybody doing? Did anyone drop off and I didn't notice? That kind of thing. Just make sure people are still with you, they're still engaged. If you need to take a little break, do that if it's a long call. Just making sure that the call ends with as much energy as it begins.
Next, let's talk about strategies for evaluating vendors, vendors that offer services to you that work virtually. We're running a little bit behind on our schedule, so I'm just going to go through these. This slide deck will be on SlideShare, and we'll also have it on our on the civicactions.com website, and we'll tweet the URL for that again. First, ask vendors for projects like yours that were developed virtually. So if somebody has, this is true for any kind of project. You want to see projects that reflect the kind of complications or specific requirements that yours has, but specifically those that were done virtually. Sometimes the truly virtual firm is an emerging thing, but not so much. You still have people that work together. There is a difference in the way that virtual teams work than a firm that works in a room together. So you want to make sure that when you're asking and doing this sort of project review, identifying whether or not that was done virtually or not. Ask them what ratio of their people work off-site. Obviously, if it's a firm where everyone is virtual, it's probably a selling point that they mention. But if they don't mention that, you want to ask, like, how many people work off-site, or how much of their time do they spend off-site? Ask vendor for the total number of hours or the number of projects that they've done virtually, and how long that particular team has worked together. You want to ask to see their project management tools and assess whether or not it's easy or hard for you to work with them. Every team has a different set of tools that they use for managing projects. There are hundreds of project management software tools out there, ticketing, doing issue tracking, things like that. So ask for a peek at how they do what they do, and make an assessment as to whether or not you think that you can work with them in that mode or with those specific tools. Ask for an overview of how they work remotely. And if they don't have a clear explanation for how they work, look out. You really want to work with a team of people, if they are presenting themselves as virtual, as really have experience in doing it. And if they have experience, they're going to have tools and processes for working virtually that they'll be able to explain to you fairly easily. You want to ask about how integrated is working virtually to their operation, and is your project point person going to be accessible to you during business hours? This is like almost a no-brainer, but you want to make sure that if you're working with a virtual team and you're in the UK, you want to know that your project point person is going to be accessible to you during the time that you need them to be. So now let's talk about skills and resources for working virtually. This is pitching to you, Tom.
Well, I had mentioned most of the work that I'm doing is with new virtual for you, that actually fit into this next slide that we're doing. It's virtualteamleader.com, and our next slide, and this may work into this, is we talked about this 90-10 rule. The big area that I work on with virtual teams is around leadership and leadership development of the person leading the team. And sometimes the people who are on the team members, who are new to virtual teams, but certainly the team leader. And the big piece that I want to share here is that there has, if we look at history, and we look at the industrial age, and then some might say that we've moved on from the industrial age and now to the information age. And what I'm going to suggest to you is that we have moved into the next age, and that is the inspiration age. And so your team success, co-located or virtual, will actually, your success financially, organizationally, your ability to forward your mission is tied into the inspiration, your ability to build and lead inspired teams. And this idea of success is not just about financial, it's not just about mission, it's also about being able to connect with the inspiration of the people who are out there who are working with you. So it's sort of this contrasting of the old school leadership style, if it ever worked, which is based on motivation, and I'm contrasting motivation and inspiration. Motivation is very technique driven. It's about what I can get you to do, but inspiration is your ability to reach out, even through time and space, to lead your team and inspire them. And oftentimes people say, well, how do you build and lead an inspired team? Step one is, on a scale of 1 to 10, if I ask each of you right now to write on a piece of paper, how inspired are you in the work that you do when you show up? The first place to be able to build and lead an inspired team is your work on your own inspiration. To what degree are you inspired by the work that you do on a daily basis? So that's some of the work that I do. And so there's these 7 qualities of the virtual team leader, and really that is the 7 qualities of what I call a coaching approach. And in fact, Jen has mentioned a couple times the word coaching. And coaching as a way of leading teams and building people up is very different than the old school, traditional, my way or the highway leadership style. And it just so happens to be that coaching as a leadership style is the most effective way to build and lead inspired teams, or virtual teams. And so I could talk for a couple hours just on this, but I put up, I'm making a series of 8 videos. I have 5 of them done, and they're going to be at this, they're at the website right now, and you can go and read it or listen to and watch a segment on each of these 7 qualities.
So we'll put up all the resources that we're mentioning. We're going to put up on that panel page that this Google Doc was linked from. Yeah, you have a question? Can you do that? The URL?
I didn't quite hear the question. You want to know the URL for which?
The notes.
Oh, yeah, it's, okay, great. It's civicactions.com/R_U, the underscores between each word, RU for real panel. All lowercase. And there's a link on that page for,
Oh, there it is. It's up at the top.
that's the page that you'll go to. And then there's a shared notes link on the webpage there that'll take you to the Google Doc.
And again, we'll post the slides there and the link to the videos that Tom's talking about and the other resources to look at.
So did you want to talk about the 7 qualities?
I mean, I'm looking at our time. We've got 15 minutes. At this, we end at 3, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to make sure that we also have the Q&A and looking at the rest of our material here. How are we looking?
Okay.
It's really just tools dimension.
Okay.
Yeah. I would say let's just, why don't you just give a highlight, just list what the 7 things are so that people can
Okay.
get a sense.
Well, the 7 qualities again are these: the leader as coach, and you distinguishing a coaching approach of leadership as opposed to what I'm going to refer to as a traditional style of leadership. And I'm going to give you one piece here that might be useful for you. And how many of you are familiar with Patrick Lencioni, who wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team? Anybody? Yeah, it's a great book. You can find his work at tablegroup.com. And he's written a number of really great books, and one of them is The 5 Dysfunctions. But he wrote an article not long ago entitled The Painful Reality of Adrenaline Addiction. And one of the challenges that many people who work at a distance, even though Ian was talking about sitting on your porch and listening to the birds and feeling the sun on your face, what I find is many people who are new to leading virtual teams and working on virtual teams oftentimes get addicted to adrenaline. And so one of the things that you're going to see in the video, and I can provide this article to you, but he talks about executives with adrenaline addiction are the ones always pecking at their BlackBerries during meetings, talking on their cell phones during every 5-minute break from those meetings, and checking email late at night. They go from meeting to meeting with no time in between for reflection or thought. Always overwhelmed, adrenaline junkies seem to have a constant need for urgency, even panic, to get them through the day. And he goes on, he says, there is something particularly insidious about adrenaline addiction that makes it hard for many leaders to kick the habit. Unlike other addicts whose behaviors are socially frowned upon, adrenaline addicts are often praised for their frenetic activity, even promoted for it during their careers. And so they often wear their problem like a badge of honor, failing to see it as an addiction at all in spite of the pain it causes. And this is particularly true, I think, for people who are new to virtual teams, because they're not, for some virtual team leaders, it is an add-on to what they were already doing. So they're doing their normal job, and then someone walks in one day and says, hey, by the way, we want you to lead this, we want you to have this virtual aspect. And so the next thing you know, they have learned to keep up this pace. And so there is, I actually have a self-assessment. I need to make a note to myself to put that self-assessment. It's an adrenaline addiction self-assessment tool that I work with leaders of virtual teams. And you can go through this self-assessment and determine the degree to which you are addicted to adrenaline, and then how to get off of this. I could share some funny stories, scary stories about leaders co-located and virtual who became aware of this adrenaline addiction, and then what they had to do to get off the adrenaline addiction. And some of the things actually are what Civic Action has implemented as systems to reduce the adrenaline addiction. Some of the things, just like how to have conversations so that there's not like this program running in the background because I've had a disagreement with Ian that's a month old or 2 months old, but I don't have a way to handle that. So there's some of those things are you can put in place.
Cool. Let's give you an incomplete list of tools. This is written in the old style because it sort of reflects the fact that technology is progressively obsolete. Meaning, you know, we're going to give you a list of tools, but I'll tell you in a year that this list will be obsolete, maybe in 6 months. So it's not meant to be a complete list at all. There are a number of tools for instant messaging, voice over IP, sharing documents, telephone conferencing, calendar, screen sharing, and project schedule. Again, it's a very a brief list. All of this will be up on our website without going into too much detail, because we're really, if you take one thing away from this, really the 90-10 rule is probably it. Working virtually is all about human interaction. The technology that's used to deliver that is kind of irrelevant. What really matters is how you are dealing with people. So we really don't want to emphasize the tools so much, but at least make a list of them available for you. So now let's do a quick Q&A. This is a time for you to ask us questions, and we'll answer them to the best of our abilities. So who has a question or a Q? I feel very strongly that email is best for documenting conversations. And I feel very strongly that it's best to have a call. If it's too easy to get in the mode of answering and spending your entire workday, you know, in the virtual office, firing off emails all the time. And it actually is, you know, especially when there starts to become tension, I always advise people pick up the phone. Or for deadlines, because what happens when you send an email and something needs to happen, and that person's sitting in their inbox, maybe they're outside back in the pool or something. You want to get them on the phone. I always recommend using the phone first.
There's an assumption with email, with virtual workers, that they're just always reading their email, and it's not true. We do other things like work, and sometimes that's engineering and building things or working with clients, but it's not, just because you're virtual does not mean you're always looking at your email, and so there can be a tendency to just fire things off and say, well, I sent it, why didn't you get it, kind of thing. And it's just a dangerous thing, especially with breakdowns occurring. Just pick up the phone automatically, because it can just add fuel to the fire of a breakdown to send email.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Great.
Another way that I've experienced doing that is having office hours when you're virtual, to just, if you're managed by somebody who's in a building and needs to know when you're there, if you have to mix actual productive work with being available for pinging and emailing, have office hours that are, I'll be available 2 hours in the middle of the morning and 2 hours in the middle of the afternoon if you want to reach me directly. Otherwise, I'm working. So it helps you be more productive, and it helps people feel like their green light's on their chat, but they're not responding, so they don't get upset. So and it can help, especially if you're being managed by somebody and you're working virtually, to just build trust in the fact that you're working when you're working, because there's sort of an automatic assumption that when people say, oh yeah, I want to work from home, it's like, I'm going to work from home, meaning I'm going to take my kids to the dentist and go out for a walk with the dog and swim in the pool and then maybe check my email in the afternoon. But having office hours really helps, because then they know you're there. And you have to respect the office hours. So when you say you're going to be there, you have to be there.
Yeah, in the back. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you definitely want to manage the communication styles and manage communication. So when people are having poor communication, you want to manage that. At Civic Actions and most virtual firms, what the whole benefit of it is that it is a flexible way to work. So rather than, are you working this amount of time or whatever, you're measuring and appraising the outcomes and whether or not people are delivering to the expectations that you've set out for them. And in that respect, there's not much difference between, performance review for someone who works virtually versus somebody who doesn't. Because except for the fact that you're, one of the typical, performance reviews, do they work well with others? Well, you can measure that and you can respond to that, how they work with, because they don't do as much, the emphasis is much more on the quality of the work that they're delivering. Yeah, I'm saying that it's less of an emphasis. I mean, it's important because we all work together, and there's a way to track that, and that's why I'm saying, managing their communication styles and things like that. But really, when you have someone who's working virtually, you want to be measuring the outcome and not really care so much about, whether they're online, all the time or not. It's like really you want to just be able to manage to the outcome.
I would also add to that, if you're giving a performance review of somebody working virtually, either drive them or fly them into the office and do it in person. It can be really difficult to hear criticism or feedback that's negative if you're on the phone, especially with somebody who you're not with personally a lot. So I would definitely recommend just having those in person. If they're once or twice a year, it's a really good chance to come into the office for somebody who's always out and get feedback.
Well, thanks everyone for sticking around, paying attention.
Thank you.
Yay.